The twin suns of Khazrak burned mercilessly overhead, casting long shadows across the crystalline desert that stretched endlessly in all directions. Thakkanear adjusted the thermal regulator on his environmental suit and squinted through the polarized visor at the shimmering horizon. 3 cycles had passed since his exile from the Iron Spine clan, and still the memories of that terrible night haunted his dreams. The crimson sand beneath his boots crunched with each step, composed of pulverized ironstone that had been ground down by millennia of stellar winds. In the distance, the skeletal remains of ancient mining towers jutted from the landscape like the bones of some prehistoric beast, their quantum drilling apparatus long since stripped away by scavengers and time. Thakkanear's massive frame, even by Orc standards, cast an imposing shadow as he trudged through the wasteland. His tusks, filed to razor sharpness in the tradition of his people, gleamed beneath his helmet's heads-up display. Scars crisscrossed his green-tinged skin, each one a story of survival in this hostile world. The neural implants behind his ears hummed softly, constantly analyzing atmospheric conditions and scanning for threats. His father, War Chief Thakkanear the Ironbreaker, had ruled the Iron Spine clan for 40 standard years, transforming them from a collection of warring tribes into the most powerful faction on Khazrak. Under his leadership, the Orcs had mastered the art of plasma forging and quantum metallurgy, turning their homeworld's abundant mineral resources into the finest weapons and armor in the Outer Rim. The clan's war barges could punch through the shields of Imperial dreadnoughts, and their warriors were feared across 7 star systems. But power breeds envy, and envy breeds treachery. Thakkanear's jaw clenched as he remembered the face of Morgoth the Pale, his father's most trusted lieutenant. The albino orc had served at Thakkanear's right hand for decades, commanding the clan's space fleet with cunning and ruthlessness. None had suspected that behind those colorless eyes burned an ambition that would stop at nothing to claim the chieftain's throne. The betrayal had come during the festival of the Iron Moon, when both of Khazrak's moons aligned to create a spectacular display of electromagnetic interference. The clan had gathered in the Great Forge, the massive underground complex that served as both factory and fortress. Ancient traditions demanded that the war chief demonstrate his strength by personally forging a ceremonial weapon using the clan's most sacred techniques. Thakkanear had been there, standing proudly among the inner circle as his father heated the plasma core to temperatures that could melt durasteel. The ritual had proceeded normally until the moment came for the quenching ceremony. Instead of the blessed waters from the sacred springs, Morgoth had substituted a corrosive compound that reacted violently with the superheated metal. The explosion had been instantaneous and devastating. Thakkanear was killed immediately, his body vaporized by the plasma discharge. 17 other clan members perished in the blast, including Thakkanear's younger brother, Thakkanear, who had been standing at their father's side. In the chaos that followed, Morgoth had moved swiftly to consolidate power. He claimed that Thakkanear had sabotaged the ceremony out of impatience to claim his inheritance. The evidence was circumstantial but damning. Thakkanear had been the last to handle the quenching solution, and his proximity to the blast had left him unconscious and unable to defend himself. When he finally awoke in the clan's medical bay, it was to find himself under heavy guard. The Elders' Council, led by Morgoth's cronies, had already voted to strip him of his birthright and condemn him to exile. The Pale Orc had played his hand perfectly, eliminating his rivals while appearing to be the grieving victim of a tragic betrayal. Now, as Thakkanear paused to check his water reserves, he felt the familiar surge of rage that threatened to overwhelm his rational mind. The exile mark burned between his shoulder blades, a neural tattoo that would identify him instantly to any clan member and mark him as kinslayer and traitor. But beneath the anger was something else, a cold, calculating fury that had sustained him through these long months in the wilderness. He would have his revenge. He would expose Morgoth's treachery and reclaim his father's throne. But first, he needed allies, and on Khazrak, there was only one place where an exile might find sanctuary among his own kind. The Bone Valley. The descent into the Bone Valley took Thakkanear the better part of 2 days, navigating treacherous cliff faces and unstable rock formations that could shift without warning. The valley had earned its name from the fossilized remains of massive creatures that had once roamed Khazrak's surface before the great atmospheric processors had transformed the world into a mining paradise. Now their bleached skeletons served as landmarks and shelter for those who had fallen from grace. As he rappelled down the final escarpment, Thakkanear could see the settlement spread out below him. Ramshackle structures built from salvaged ship hulls and mining equipment clung to the valley walls like metal parasites. Smoke rose from countless forge fires, and the sound of hammering echoed off the canyon walls as the inhabitants went about their daily business of survival. The Bone Valley was home to the cast-offs of Orc society, exiles, criminals, deserters, and anyone else who had found themselves on the wrong side of clan justice. It was a place where strength was the only law and yesterday's enemies could become today's allies if the price was right. Thakkanear had visited here once before as a youth, accompanying his father on a diplomatic mission to negotiate the return of stolen clan property. He remembered being both fascinated and repulsed by the chaotic energy of the place. Now it was his only hope. The guards at the valley's entrance were a mismatched pair of scarred veterans, their armor a patchwork of salvaged components from a dozen different manufacturers. They eyed Thakkanear suspiciously as he approached, plasma rifles held at the ready. "State your business, stranger," growled the larger of the two, a grizzled orc whose left arm had been replaced with a mechanical prosthetic. "The valley don't welcome tourists." "I seek audience with the Scrap King," Thakkanear replied, using the formal phrase he remembered from his youth. "I come bearing news of interest to all who dwell in shadow." The guards exchanged glances. The formal words marked him as someone with knowledge of the old ways, but his obvious exile status made him dangerous. After a moment's hesitation, the mechanical-armed guard gestured toward the settlement. "Keep your weapons peace-bonded and your temper in check. The king don't like surprises, and neither do we." Thakkanear made his way through the crowded streets of the settlement, drawing curious stares from the inhabitants. The air was thick with the smell of exotic fuels and industrial solvents, mixed with the more familiar scents of roasted meat and fermented spirits. Vendors hawked everything from illegal neuromodifications to rare isotopes, their wares displayed on makeshift stalls carved from meteoric rock. The Scrap King's Palace was the largest structure in the valley, a towering edifice built from the wreckage of an Imperial battlecruiser that had crashed here decades ago. Its hull plates had been polished to a mirror shine, and energy weapons had been mounted at strategic points along its walls. A steady stream of petitioners and merchants flowed in and out through the main airlock, conducting the business that kept the valley's economy functioning. Inside, Thakkanear found himself in a vast throne room lit by banks of glowing plasma conduits. The air hummed with the barely contained energy of antimatter generators, and the walls were decorated with the weapons and armor of defeated challengers. At the far end of the chamber, on a throne carved from a single piece of crystallized dark matter, sat the Scrap King himself. Bolgoth the Reaped was a legend among the Orc clans, a warrior whose exploits in the Centauri Rebellion had made him a hero until a falling out with the clan council had led to his exile 30 years ago. Half his body had been replaced with cybernetic implants after a near-fatal encounter with an Imperial assassin, giving him a fearsome appearance that perfectly matched his reputation. His remaining organic eye fixed on Thakkanear with predatory interest as the exile approached the throne. "Well, well," Bolgotha's voice was a mechanical rasp that echoed through hidden speakers. "The princeling of the Iron Spine comes calling. Tell me, young Thakkanear, what brings the son of Thakkanear to my humble domain?" Word of his exile had clearly reached even this remote corner of the world. Thakkanear straightened his shoulders and met the Scrap King's gaze without flinching. "I come seeking justice, Lord Bolgoth. My father was murdered by a traitor, and I have been falsely accused of the crime. I would ask for sanctuary while I gathered the proof needed to expose the real killer." Bolgoth leaned back in his throne, metallic fingers drumming against the armrest. "Morgoth the Pale, I assume?" "Yes, word of your father's death reached us quickly, along with news of your supposed treachery." He paused, studying Thakkanear's face carefully. "But you don't have the look of a kinslayer, boy. Too much honor in those eyes, too much genuine grief. Your father was a good orc, even if he was too trusting for his own good. Then you'll grant me sanctuary?" Perhaps. Bolgoth stood and descended from his throne, his mechanical legs whirring softly. But nothing in the valley comes free, as you well know. If I shelter you, it will be because you've proven your worth to me and mine. There's a job needs doing, something that requires a warrior of proven skill and unquestioned courage. Complete it successfully, and you'll have my protection. Fail, and you'll find yourself back in the desert with nothing but the clothes on your back. Thakanear nodded without hesitation. Name your price. A predatory smile spread across Bolgoth's scarred features. There's a shipment of quantum processors being transported through the Shattered Belt asteroid field tomorrow night. Imperial military convoy, heavily guarded, but the payload would keep the valley in business for the next 5 years. The job requires someone with intimate knowledge of clan warbarge systems, someone who can crack Imperial encryption on the fly. A piracy run, Thakanear mused. Against the Empire. The same empire that's been squeezing tribute from every independent world in the sector, Bolgoth replied. The same empire that turns a blind eye to clan feuds as long as the mining quotas are met. Consider it a strike against tyranny if it helps you sleep at night. Thakanear weighed his options. Attacking an imperial convoy was an act of open rebellion that would mark him as an enemy of the state. But he was already in exile with nothing left to lose, and the resources of the valley could prove invaluable in his quest for vengeance. I accept your terms, he said finally. When do we leave? The warbarge Gutripper was a study in controlled chaos, its hull a patchwork of salvaged components and improvised modifications that somehow managed to function as a cohesive whole. As Thakanear made his way through the ship's corridors toward the bridge, he marveled at the ingenuity of its creators. Plasma conduits had been rerouted through carved bone channels, and the artificial gravity generators had been synchronized with a collection of mismatched inertial dampeners to create a surprisingly smooth ride. The crew was equally eclectic, drawn from every clan and tribe on Khazrak. There was Vexire, a fierce female warrior from the Stormbreak clan whose mastery of zero-gravity combat was legendary. Beside her stood Krull Ironjaw, a demolitions expert whose clan had been wiped out in the Terran Wars but whose knowledge of Imperial ship systems was unparalleled. The others were a mix of exiles, mercenaries, and fortune-seekers, united only by their loyalty to Bolgoth and their shared hatred of authority. Captain Scar Bloodfist commanded the vessel with the easy competence of someone who had spent decades in space. The grizzled veteran had lost his left eye in a boarding action against Centauri pirates, and the cybernetic replacement glowed with a soft blue light as it interfaced with the ship's targeting systems. All right, you scum, Scar growled as the crew assembled on the bridge. Today we're hitting an Imperial convoy in the Shattered Belt. 3 ships, 2 escort frigates and a heavy transport carrying quantum processors worth more than this entire ship. The escort captains are experienced, but they're following standard Imperial doctrine, which means they're predictable. He activated the main tactical display, showing a 3-dimensional map of the asteroid field. The convoy's projected route was highlighted in red, weaving between the larger rocks to avoid debris impacts. The transport is the ISV Retribution, a Pacifica-class heavy hauler with military-grade shields and armor. The escorts are Dagger and Saber, both Raptor-class frigates with full complements of fighters. Our window of opportunity comes here. He pointed to a particularly dense cluster of asteroids, where they'll have to slow down to navigate the debris field. Thakanear studied the display with professional interest. The frigate captains will position themselves to cover the transport's flanks, but the asteroid field will limit their maneuverability. If we can disable their sensors, we can use the rocks for cover and hit them from multiple angles. My thinking exactly. Scar nodded approvingly. Vexire and her team will handle the boarding action once we crack their hull. Krull, I want you to concentrate on disabling their engines without damaging the cargo bay. Thakanear, your job is to break their encryption and override their automated defenses. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Thakanear spent the time familiarizing himself with the ship's computer systems and reviewing Imperial tactical protocols. The Gutripper's quantum processors were several generations behind the latest military standard, but they had been extensively modified by Valley technicians who understood that subtlety was often more effective than brute force. As they approached the intercept point, the tension on the bridge became palpable. The crew had conducted dozens of similar raids, but attacking an Imperial convoy was always dangerous. The Empire might turn a blind eye to clan feuds and minor piracy, but an assault on their military vessels would bring swift and brutal retaliation. "Contact," announced the sensor operator, a young Orc whose neural implants allowed him to interface directly with the ship's detection grid. 3 ships on approach vector, configuration matches intelligence reports. Scar activated the ship's stealth systems, and the gut ripper seemed to fade from existence as its hull plating adjusted to match the background radiation of space. They drifted silently between 2 massive asteroids, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The Imperial ships moved through the field with mechanical precision, their formation designed to provide maximum protection for the vulnerable transport. Thakanear watched the tactical display with growing admiration for the escort captain's skill. They were maintaining perfect spacing despite the navigational hazards, and their sensor sweeps were overlapping to eliminate blind spots. "Beginning jamming sequence," reported the communications officer. "Electromagnetic pulse in 3, 2, 1 mark." The effect was immediate and devastating. The Imperial sensors went dark for critical seconds, and in that brief window of confusion, the gut ripper struck like a hammer blow from the void. Plasma cannons erupted in brilliant streams of coherent energy, punching through the Saber's shield generators and crippling her propulsion systems. The frigate tumbled helplessly as her crew struggled to restore power, leaving the transport exposed to attack. "Boarding pods away!" Scar shouted as Vexire led her assault team into the launch tubes. The magnetic catapults hurled the armored pods across the gap between ships, their occupants protected by layers of ablative armor and inertial dampeners. Thakanear's fingers flew across his console as he worked to penetrate the transport's security systems. Imperial encryption was formidable, but he had spent years studying their protocols during his time as heir to the Iron Spine clan. The key was understanding their reliance on standardized procedures. Once you cracked the base algorithm, the rest followed predictably. "I'm in," he announced as the transport's automated defenses powered down. "Defensive grids offline, emergency bulkheads sealed. The crew is trapped in the forward sections." The second frigate, Dagger, had recovered from the initial surprise and was moving to intercept, her weapons charging for a devastating broadside. But Captain Scar had anticipated this move, and the gut ripper was already sliding behind a massive asteroid for cover. "Crawl now would be good," Scar muttered as plasma bolts scorched the rock around them. The demolitions expert's response was typically understated. "Give me 30 seconds to find their reactor shielding frequency." His fingers danced across a jury-rigged interface that connected directly to the ship's missile systems, programming a specialized electromagnetic warhead designed to overload power coupling systems. The missile streaked across space like a lance of fire, weaving between debris fragments to strike the frigate's engineering section. The explosion was surprisingly small, but its effects were immediately apparent as the Dagger's weapons powered down and her engines began to sputter. "Vexire to bridge," came the assault leader's voice over the communicator. "Transport secured, crew neutralized. Beginning cargo transfer now." The operation proceeded with clockwork efficiency. The Valley's pirates had perfected the art of smash-and-grab raids, stripping valuable cargo while leaving the Imperial crews alive but helpless. It was a calculated strategy designed to avoid escalating their conflict with the Empire beyond the point of no return. Within an hour, the quantum processors had been transferred to the Gutripper's hold, and the boarding teams had withdrawn. As they prepared to depart, Thakanear found himself studying the tactical display one final time, memorizing every detail of the operation for future reference. "Clean work," Scar commented as the ship engaged its hyperdrive and jumped to safety. "You've got good instincts for this kind of thing." Thakanear nodded his thanks but remained silent. The raid had been successful, but it was only the first step in a much longer journey. He had proven his worth to Bolgoth and earned sanctuary in the valley, but his true goal remained unchanged. Somewhere on Kazrak, Morgoth the Pale sat on a throne that rightfully belonged to the Iron Spine bloodline. And Thakanear would not rest until justice was served and his father's murder was avenged. The quantum processors proved to be even more valuable than Bolgoth had anticipated. When the Valley's technicians cracked the Imperial security seals, they discovered that the shipment contained not just standard computational hardware, but prototype neural interface modules designed for the Empire's new generation of cybernetic soldiers. The technology was decades ahead of anything available on the black market, and its potential applications were staggering. These units could revolutionize our entire operation, Bolgoth explained as he and Thakanear examined the confiscated cargo in the Valley's primary workshop. Direct neural control of ship systems, instantaneous data analysis, enhanced reaction times. We could upgrade every warrior in the settlement. Thakanear studied one of the gleaming modules with professional interest. The device was smaller than his thumb but contained processing power equivalent to the main computer on a clan war barge. Imperial engineering was impressive in its miniaturization, but he could see subtle flaws in the design that suggested the technology was still experimental. The interface protocols are too aggressive, he observed, pointing to the neural coupling array. Extended use would cause severe neurological damage. The Empire is sacrificing their soldiers' long-term health for short-term combat effectiveness. Typical Imperial thinking, Bolgoth snorted. They've always considered their people to be expendable resources. But with the right modifications, we could eliminate the harmful side effects while retaining the enhanced capabilities. It was during his examination of the neural modules that Thakanear made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden within the device's memory core was a fragment of encrypted data that had nothing to do with the interface protocols. At first glance, it appeared to be random system noise, but something about the pattern struck him as familiar. Working through the night in his assigned quarters, Thakanear slowly decoded the hidden message using cryptographic techniques his father had taught him years ago. What he found sent chills down his spine. The data fragment contained a partial transaction record from the Kazrak orbital station, documenting the purchase of industrial chemicals 3 days before his father's death. The buyer's identity had been carefully obscured, but the payment method revealed a credit account linked to Morgoth's personal finances. Here was the proof he had been seeking, evidence that the Pale Orc had planned his treachery well in advance. But the fragment was incomplete, containing only part of the larger transaction. To build a convincing case against Morgoth, he would need the complete records, and those were stored in the orbital station's secured databases. Thakanear brought his discovery to Bolgoth the next morning, laying out the evidence and explaining its significance. The Scrap King listened with growing interest, his cybernetic eye glowing brighter as he processed the implications. So you want to break into the most heavily defended facility in the system, Bolgoth summarized. The orbital station's security systems are legendary, and even if we could get inside, the data cores are protected by quantum encryption that would take centuries to crack. Not if we had inside help, Thakanear replied. My contact in the Iron Spine clan could provide us with the access codes we need. He was thinking of Zargoth, his childhood friend who had risen to become the clan's primary data analyst. The young orc had always been more interested in computers than combat, spending his time developing new encryption algorithms and security protocols for the clan's communications network. More importantly, he had never believed the accusations against Thakanear and had secretly maintained contact through encoded messages hidden in routine data transmissions. And what makes you think he'd be willing to commit treason against his own clan? Bolgoth asked skeptically. Because he knows the truth about my father's death. Zargoth was responsible for analyzing the chemical residue from the explosion, and he found traces of compounds that shouldn't have been present in the quenching solution. When he tried to report his findings to the Elders' Council, Morgoth had him reassigned to orbital station duty, effectively exiling him from the planet. Bolgoth leaned back in his chair, mechanical fingers drumming against the armrest. Even if your friend is willing to help, getting to the orbital station won't be easy. The approach vectors are heavily monitored, and any unauthorized vessel will be destroyed on sight. Leave that to me, Thakanear said. I have an idea, but it will require some of those neural interface modules we captured. The plan he outlined was audacious in its simplicity. Rather than attempting to assault the station directly, they would infiltrate it using a captured Imperial shuttle and forged credentials. The neural interfaces would allow a small team to perfectly mimic Imperial military personnel, downloading behavioral patterns and access codes directly into their minds. The risks were enormous. If they were discovered, the Empire would respond with overwhelming force, potentially destroying the Bone Valley and everyone in it. But the potential rewards, proof of Morgatha's treachery and the means to reclaim Thakanaar's birthright, were worth any danger. "I'll need volunteers," Thakanaar said as he concluded his presentation. "Warriors willing to risk everything for a chance at justice." Bolgoth was quiet for a long moment, weighing the proposal carefully. Finally, he nodded his approval. "You'll have your team," he decided. "But I want something in return. When you reclaim your father's throne, the Bone Valley will be under your protection. No more exile marks, no more persecution of those who've fallen from grace. The outcasts deserve a voice in the new order." It was a fair request, and one that aligned with Thakanaar's own vision for the future. The rigid clan system that had allowed Morgoth to seize power through treachery needed to be reformed, and giving sanctuary to those who had been cast aside was a good first step. "Agreed," he said, clasping Bolgotha's mechanical hand in the traditional gesture of alliance. "When the Iron Spine clan rises again, it will remember its debts." The Imperial shuttle Meridian drifted silently through the outer sensor grid of Khazrak Orbital Station, its credentials verified by quantum-encrypted transmissions that perfectly matched fleet security protocols. To the station's automated systems, it appeared to be a routine courier run delivering personnel transfers and supply requisitions from the Surface Military Command. Inside the shuttle's cramped passenger compartment, Thakanaar fought to maintain his composure as the neural interface module filled his consciousness with foreign memories and behavioral patterns. The device had been extensively modified by the Valley's technicians to eliminate the harmful side effects, but the experience of having another personality overlaid on his own mind was deeply unsettling. He was no longer Thakanaar the Exile, but Commander Marcus Kane of Imperial Intelligence, complete with service records, personal relationships, and childhood memories that felt absolutely real despite their artificial origin. The interface was so sophisticated that he found himself thinking in standard Galactic rather than the Orcish dialect of his birth, and his body language had subtly shifted to match Imperial military bearing. Beside him, Vexire had become Lieutenant Sarah Cross, a communications specialist with a flawless service record and a reputation for innovative signal analysis. The transformation was remarkable. Even her posture had changed, becoming more rigid and formal to match Imperial standards. Only her eyes retained a hint of the fierce warrior spirit that lay beneath the manufactured persona. "Meridian Control to inbound shuttle," came the crisp voice of the station's traffic coordinator. "You are cleared for docking at Bay 7. Please maintain current approach vector and prepare for standard security inspection." "Acknowledge, Control," Thakanaar replied in perfect Imperial standard, his voice carrying the clipped authority of a career intelligence officer. "Meridian requesting priority clearance for classified personnel transfer. Authorization code Omega 77 Alpha." There was a brief pause as the coordinator verified the clearance code with the station's central database. The authorization was genuine, pulled from captured Imperial files and modified to grant them access to the restricted sections where Zargoth was stationed. "Clearance confirmed, Commander. Proceed to docking bay and report to Security Station Charlie for processing." The shuttle settled into its assigned berth with barely a whisper of atmosphere equalizing between the ship and station. Through the viewport, Thakanaar could see the massive bulk of Khazrak Orbital, a city-sized structure that served as the nexus for all trade and communication in the system. Thousands of workers moved through its corridors like blood cells through arteries, maintaining the complex machinery that kept the mining operation functioning. The security inspection was perfunctory, conducted by bored Imperial Marines who had processed hundreds of similar transfers. The neural interfaces provided perfect responses to routine questions, and their forged documents passed even detailed scrutiny. Within an hour, they had been cleared for transit to the station's administrative sector. Remember, Thakanear murmured to Vexira as they made their way through the crowded corridors. We're here to conduct a security audit of the data processing facility. Act like you own the place, and no one will question your presence. The advice proved sound. Imperial bureaucracy was built on strict hierarchies and unquestioning obedience to authority. As long as they projected confidence and followed proper protocols, they could move freely through areas that would normally require extensive clearance procedures. The data processing center was located in the station's heavily shielded core, protected by multiple layers of physical and electronic security. Automated sentries monitored every approach, their weapon systems primed to eliminate any unauthorized intrusion. But Thakanear's false identity granted him legitimate access to even the most sensitive areas. Zargoth was exactly where Thakanear had expected to find him, hunched over a bank of quantum processors in an isolated workstation near the facility's center. The young orc looked older than his years, his shoulders bent by the weight of knowledge he couldn't share and loyalty divided between truth and survival. Commander Kane, Zargoth said without looking up from his work, using Thakanear's assumed identity with careful precision. I wasn't expecting an inspection today. Routine security audit, Thakanear replied, activating a signal jamming device that would prevent their conversation from being monitored. I need to review the transaction logs from 3 months ago, specifically the industrial chemical purchases. Zargotha's hands stilled on his keyboard, and for a moment Thakanear thought his friend might refuse the request. But then the data analyst began typing rapidly, his fingers dancing across holographic interfaces as he navigated through layers of archived information. The files you want are heavily encrypted, he said quietly. It will take time to break through the security barriers without triggering automatic alerts. How long? Vexira asked, her altered voice carrying the impatience of a career military officer. 20 minutes, maybe 30. The quantum encryption is adaptive, designed to evolve its defenses as we attempt to crack it. Zargoth paused, meeting Thakanear's eyes directly for the first time. There are other files you should see as well. Purchase orders for materials that have nothing to do with legitimate clan business. As they waited for the decryption process to complete, Zargoth explained what he had discovered during his analysis of the explosion. The chemical compounds found in the residue were exotic materials rarely used in industrial applications, requiring specialized knowledge to synthesize and deploy effectively. More disturbing was the pattern of purchases leading up to the attack, small quantities of components acquired over several months from different suppliers, designed to avoid detection by automated monitoring systems. Morgoth has been planning this for years, Zargoth concluded grimly. The explosion was just the culmination of a larger conspiracy to seize control of the clan. The first decrypted files began appearing on Zargoth's screen, revealing a complex web of financial transactions that painted a damning picture of premeditated murder. Morgoth had not acted alone. The purchase records showed payments to at least 6 different accomplices, including members of the Elders' Council who had voted to exile Thakanear. We need everything, Thakanear said as he studied the evidence. Every transaction, every communication, every piece of data that links Morgoth to the conspiracy. Downloading now, Zargoth replied, his fingers flying across the interface. But this will trigger security alerts once the quantum locks detect the data breach. You'll have maybe 10 minutes before Imperial security responds. The next few minutes passed in tense silence as terabytes of incriminating evidence flowed into portable storage devices. Each file was another nail in Morgoth's coffin, proof of a conspiracy so extensive that it reached into the highest levels of clan leadership. When the download was complete, they would have everything needed to expose the truth and reclaim Thakanear's rightful place. Transfer complete, Zargoth announced just as the first security alarms began to sound throughout the station. Go. I'll delay their response as long as possible. Thakanear clasped his friend's shoulder in gratitude. Come with us. When this is over, you'll have a place of honor in the new order. Zargoth shook his head sadly. My duty is here, protecting the data archives from corruption. But promise me one thing, when you expose Morgoth's crimes, remember that not all who serve him do so willingly. Some of us are trapped by circumstances beyond our control. There was no time for lengthy farewells. Imperial security forces were already converging on their location, their heavy boots echoing through the corridors as they sealed off potential escape routes. Thakanear and Vexira moved swiftly toward the nearest emergency airlock, their neural interfaces providing detailed knowledge of the station's layout and emergency procedures. The escape was a blur of controlled chaos, automated security systems triggering randomly as Zargoth fed false data into the station's central computer. By the time Imperial forces reached the data center, the infiltrators had already launched themselves into space using emergency escape pods, their trajectory calculated to intersect with a prearranged pickup point where the Gutripper waited in stealth mode. As they watched Kazrak orbital recede into the distance, Thakanear felt a mixture of triumph and anticipation. The evidence they had stolen would expose Morgotha's treachery beyond any doubt, but presenting it to the clan would require careful planning and perfect timing. The real battle was only just beginning.